Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the boxing circuit. We are Sunday evening here in the UK. So, just before we finish for the weekend, I wanted to jump on and do a quick video recapping some of this weekend's action. There's a few fights in particular I thought would be appropriate to touch on. Looking at the results of those, the ramifications, what comes next. I'll give you my thoughts. And as usual, it'd be great to get the thoughts of yourselves as well. Just before we jump into that, as you can probably tell, we are quite new to the YouTube platform. We've put out a number of videos recently which seem to be performing well from a viewership standpoint. Still could do with a bit of help growing our subscribers. So if you do find that you like our videos, if you could hit like and subscribe, we'd really appreciate you supporting growing the channel. So with that said, let's move into recapping this weekend's action. Only one place to start, and that is Zhang knocking out Joyce in the third round last night. I did a quick video with my instant reaction to it. At the time, I was very devastated for Joe. Was quite shocked, to be honest, because prior to that, I was actually picking Joe to win the fight. I thought that Zhang showed as much as he could show in the first fight. I didn't really think he was capable of much more. Now, some might say he didn't need to be because obviously he finished Joe in that fight. But I guess I got drawn into the view that had his eye not have closed in the first fight, Joe would have come on strong, Zhang would have faded, and Joe could have picked up the victory. So going into this fight, I was expecting something along those lines. So I was actually predicting a Joyce win between round 7 and 9. Obviously, was badly mistaken because Zhang got the job done even quicker this time, finishing Joe in the third round. I actually thought that Joe started the fight okay. You know, he seemed to be moving well. He's moving around to his left, so evading Zhang straight left. As I mentioned in the video last night, even when Zhang threw a couple of straight lefts in the first round, Joe seemed to have his guard quite high, so was taking him on the gloves. The second round, a little bit of a repeat from the first fight. Zhang started to get through with some sort of piercing shots, which were troubling Joe in the second. The third round, we all know what happened. Zhang continued to pile on the pressure and stopped Joyce right at the end of the round. It was a devastating right hook, would have knocked most people out, most heavyweights. Zhang was 20.5 stone last night. So imagine that hitting you. Most men aren't getting up. To Joe's credit, he did get up, but it was just a bit too late. And the referee did the right thing in stopping the fight. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the result because, this is the fight sport at the end of the day. People win and they lose. I'm not going to write Joyce off. That's not my job to do that. He gave as best as he could. But unfortunately, he just met a guy in Zhang who's got his number. That's no slight on Joe. But what this probably does mean for Joe is that his ambitions of world honours pretty much faded last night. So I think Joe's probably reached his ceiling in Zhang. Obviously, we'll see if Zhang goes on to become a world champion. But for the moment, I think that Joe's obviously going to have to rebuild. But for the moment, I think that Joe's going to have to consider his options. And sort of be realistic as to where he fits in the heavyweight landscape. The good news, and I do think this is good news because, I do like Joyce and I do think he's a good heavyweight. He said immediately after the fight that he doesn't have any plans to retire. And I think that's fine because I think there's still some good fights for Joyce out there. Granted, he's not going to make the same type of money that you would make if you were a world champion. But, he didn't make it to the world champion stage. So he's never tasted that money. That money was never real. So he just needs to really adjust and pivot to look at the fights that could generate in the most amount of money. So when I'm thinking about Joe's future, I'm thinking the likes of, if you look at a heavyweight like Fabio Wardley, David Adelaide coming through, Fraser Clark needs a worthwhile opponent. You've got the Daniel Dubois rematch. You've got Derek Chisora and Joyce. That would be quite a fun fight. Dillian White, who knows what happens there when he comes back from whatever's going on at the moment with his legal proceedings. So Joe, as I understand it, isn't really a valuable commodity outside of the UK. So I don't see him going to fight in the US or pretty much anywhere around the world, to be honest, other than in the UK. So he's fortunate because we do have some rising stars on the UK heavyweight scene. So look, I don't think Joe should retire. I think there's plenty of options for Joe. Yes, they might not be as grand as, challenging for world titles, but he could certainly feature as chief support on a number of cards coming up. So I'm glad that Joe said he doesn't plan to retire. I do think perhaps he does need to look at his training situation. Is Ismail Salas the right guy for him? I didn't really see any adjustments last night. I think the first fight was a poor display as well. Joe's got away with it in his past few fights, because the fighters that he's taken on, for whatever reason, haven't gone on to show the ambition that Zhang did. Maybe they just weren't as good as Zhang. In fact, they weren't as good as Zhang. So he's got away with it up until now. But I think he come unstuck last night, and potentially it might be time for a change. So watch this space in terms of Joyce. But I'm glad to hear that he's not retiring, because I think that's the right call. Because look, there's plenty of fun fights out there, and one thing we've got to get better at is when a guy loses, he's not garbage. It's like when AJ lost to Usyk twice. Everyone's like, oh, he's rubbish. He was never as good as he thought he was, and people were saying he was. And people are saying the same thing about Joyce now. Granted, it was a terrible performance in both fights against Zhilei Zhang, but let's not write this guy off. He's Olympic silver medalist, for Christ's sake. So, I'm glad Joe's not retiring. Let's see what's next for him. In terms of Zhilei Zhang, I think that he obviously now is going to be called at some stage to be the mandatory for the WBO. Usyk holds that title at the moment. I don't really think he causes Usyk problems. I don't think Zhang causes Usyk problems, Fury problems. I think AJ would beat him. I think Wilder would beat him. So Zhilei Zhang's probably sort of that level just beneath the top guys. But nonetheless, he's got the belt, which effectively guarantees him a shot at the WBO title. So we'll see what happens there. But, congratulations to Zhilei Zhang. Over in the States, there was a couple of British interests. So the first one was a fight. Sandy Ryan took on Jessica McCaskill last night for the unification belts in the welterweight division. Now, I watched this fight. I was excited about the fight. I did a video beforehand wishing Sandy all the best. I thought that she could pick up the win. I didn't think it would be easy, but I thought she could do it. And after I watched the fight last night, I thought she did do it. Was massively surprised at the end when they declared it a draw. Didn't agree with those scorecards whatsoever. I thought Sandy Ryan was the clear winner. It was another case of a robbery, a bad robbery this was as well. I think Jessica McCaskill, for me, picked up 2, maybe 3 rounds. And I'm not just being biased because I'm obviously a Brit. I call it down the middle, and I call it as I see it. And Sandy Ryan, for me, won at least 7 of those rounds. I thought that, she showed a great display of punch variation. Some of her shots felt like they were packing a bit more power. Her accuracy was spot on last night, and she wasn't afraid to get stuck in when she needed to. She didn't let McCaskill bully her, even though McCaskill is obviously the more seasoned fighter. Sandy Ryan stood her ground and was able to push McCaskill back at a number of times. So we saw Sandy Ryan on the front foot, on the back foot, moving well last night. I thought it was a great display. So in the end, to see it declared a draw, I just thought was outrageous, to be honest. And I felt so sorry for Sandy Ryan, because I mentioned in my video that I did beforehand, I had followed her on social media recently, and she had put a lot into this camp. A lot. I think she moved over to the States to prepare for it. This was everything for her last night, and it would have been massive if she'd have got the victory, and she should have got the victory. So she can feel massively hard done by. I mean, it doesn't make her feel any better, I'm sure, because she's still coming back to the UK. With the WBO title granted, but she should have 2 more belts and the Ring Magazine belt to add to that as well. So it looks like they might do the rematch. Hopefully they can get it over here. I know UK judging has been a bit suspect over the past 12 months, but if they can get the rematch, it's only right, I think, that they do it over here. Once in the US, once in the UK. And I think on this occasion, Sandy might just press a little bit harder and not leave it up to the judges. Or if they do, or if she does, make sure that it's unanimous. So, bit heartbreaking for Sandy Ryan last night. But, let's hope they can get the rematch and she can do the business from there. So the final fight I'm just going to finish on is the Conor Benn fight. Conor returned to the ring last night again on that same card in Orlando. Chief support, obviously knocking down the McCaskill and Sandy Ryan a little bit further down the card. What did I make of Conor's performance? It was probably what you would expect from a guy that's been out of the ring for 18 months and was fighting a guy who was much heavier than him. So I think that I was quite surprised at this guy because he's very durable. I knew that Orozco lost 3 fights, but he's never actually been stopped. So obviously a durable guy. And last night he just kept coming forward, and he was taking some clean shots from Conor last night. Some shots that if Conor was fighting at 147, I think would have cleared out a lot of those guys. So this guy just kept coming forward. Conor was visibly getting frustrated because he was hitting him with everything and couldn't get this guy out of here. Obviously, it went to the scorecards in the end. If I was Conor, I would potentially think about having another one before I was to take on Chris Eubank Jr. because I'm not so sure. Well, Conor's certainly not a natural middleweight because he fights at 147. So jumping two weight divisions to take on Chris Eubank Jr. if it is at 160 after last night's performance, I think that Conor should rethink that strategy because I think Chris Eubank Jr. following his performance against Liam Smith, I think walked through Conor Benn all night, and I think he would actually stop Conor Benn. Was it ring rust? Well, that would certainly have something to do with it. But also, he was fighting a guy who's naturally heavier. And Chris Eubank Jr. will be naturally heavier than him. So I think Conor potentially, should have at least one more fight, maybe even two, before he steps up to fight Chris Eubank Jr. Alternatively, we've heard Conor Benn speak this week, and it seems like he spent every last penny on trying to prove his innocence. So maybe he's just going to jump straight into the Eubank fight because it's a huge money fight. And the reality is, if he loses that fight, it's kind of like, so what? It's out of his weight division. You come back down to 147 and start challenging for world titles down there because he is a big name and he will get an opportunity at those world titles. So all in all, I thought it was an okay weekend for boxing. Disappointing in the Joyce result, but Big Joe will come again. Disappointed with Sandy's result, obviously. And Conor Benn was what it was. So the results weren't quite what we were hoping. But in terms of all of the fights, I thought they were all fairly entertaining in their own way. So that's all I wanted to jump on and say. Like I say, it's not a big one this evening. Let us know what you think. And we'll be back next week looking at some of the boxing news that will break throughout the course of the week. So thanks for tuning in again, guys. And I'll see you soon.